What if the Titanic was sunk so that the Federal Reserve could be established? The Federal Reserve and the families that operate it are behind the majority of conspiracies around the world. Some of these conspiracies have been proven, while others remain hidden behind mountains of paperwork and tons of misinformation, all in the guise of national security. Before we can discuss how the Titanic relates to the Federal Reserve, let's first discuss what the Federal Reserve is. The Federal Reserve is a centralized banking system of the United States. Almost every country has a similar banking system, and they are an institution that manages the state's currency, money supply, and interest rates. These banks have a monopoly on increasing the monetary base in a state or country and usually prints the national currency. They claim that they are held accountable to the people of the country and Congress, or a parliament. Through later videos, we see this isn't exactly correct. The Federal Reserve System and World Bank systems would take hours to fully understand, so we will break it off into sections as they are involved with different conspiracies. In this video, we will discuss why the Federal Reserve was so important to get established in the United States, who all oppose the centralized banking system, and finally, how the Titanic is involved. First, let's answer the most important question. Why does it even matter? And how does this affect me today? Most of us lucky individuals have jobs. We go to work, come home, try to raise a family. We do our best in this short life so that we can give our children a better life than we ever knew. All the while, you have a select elite group trying to tear that away. They are trying to take our future, our children's future, and use it to better their own lives. These people have a void in their soul, and the only way they can fill it is through destruction of others. We will get into the lies and manipulation later, but make no mistake, your pain, your suffering, your family's demise makes others feel good. We will soon show how these institutions have enslaved us by our willing participation in convenient technology, our social media, our TV programming, our movies, our vehicles, all smart technology, including our phones and apps we download. Why was it so important to start a centralized banking system in the United States? Here in the U.S., our economy was, and I say was with a heavy heart, a capitalistic and republic society. In a later video, we will discuss how our government went from anarchy to republic to democracy to where we are now, a quasi-socialistic country. But right now, let's talk about our capitalism. Capitalism is the idea that the public, the everyday man, decides what businesses succeed and what businesses fail, without any help from the government. Let me give you an example. We have two companies. Company A we will call Republic, and Company B we will call Wally Mart. Both are in retail, and both sell similar products. Republic sells only U.S.-made products and cares about the quality of everything they put their name on. Their customer service is unmatched, but their cost is high. Next, we have Wally Mart, that sells the products that didn't live up to the Republic standards. Everything is made overseas with no supervision, and this company doesn't care about the customers, as all they care about is destroying Republic so that they can control the market. Wally Mart sells everything at half the price of Republic. We, in a capitalistic society, get to choose which company succeeds and which one fails by spending our money. When people can no longer afford Republic and are forced to go to Wally Mart, this is when the Republic fails. In this example, I wanted to show two things. The first was to show how our money has a direct impact on corporations. Secondly, I want to show how corporations, with the Federal Reserve, fought back. In 1908, Congress decided that a full capitalistic market created too much instability in our country, especially in our banking and financial institutions. They put together the National Monetary Commission, or the Aldrich-Vreeland Act, to study the problem and recommend a solution. The chairman of this commission was a Republican Senator, Nelson Aldrich, who took a team of professionals to the European financial banks and saw how much more efficient their monetary system was. They also realized how they could easily stop people from accessing their total funds during a banking crisis, and how little accountability these banks have. From 1787 to 1907, we had no need for a Federal Reserve. What happened in 1907 to change that? Enter Mr. J.P. Morgan. In 1907, we went through a banking crisis where the New York Stock Exchange fell almost 50% from its peak the previous year. Rumors spread, and this had the people of the United States pulling out their money from the banking institutions, which caused the banks to run out. To stop the panic, J.P. Morgan intervened and pledged large sums of his own money and convinced other bankers to do the same. At this time, when you deposited money at the banks had two choices. They could hold on to your money and charge you interest, or they could invest your money in the stock market and make even more. Although the person depositing the money never felt the financial gain, they definitely felt the loss. When the stock market collapsed, the banks no longer had your money, and you would be lucky to get anything back. An easy solution would have been for the government to stop banks from investing your money into risky ventures. But J.P. Morgan had another idea. J.P. Morgan would get others to loan banks money only if we started a centralized banking system. He worked with Senator Aldrich, who just so happened to be the father-in-law of John D. Rockefeller Jr., to get this established. Now remember these names, as a lot of these families have direct involvement of conspiracies even today. Let's move on to the opposition. Who opposed the central banking system? People forget why we even have a United States. Taxation without representation. We were fighting the Bank of England, who was forcing taxes on the people. Benjamin Franklin said that the prime reason for the Revolutionary War was for colonists to get the power to issue their own money out of the hands of King George III and the international bankers. He also was asked why these young colonies are booming economically. He answered, "That is simple. In the colonies, we issue our own money. It is called the colonial scrip. We issue it in proper proportions to the demands of trade and industry." This sounds capitalistic. In 1781, Alexander Hamilton established the first central bank, the Bank of America, way back when this bank was still American-owned. Currently, the Chinese operate this bank. International banks saw that interest-free scrip would keep America free from their influence. Hamilton was for the centralized Bank of America, but warned what would happen if the international banks gained influence. Napoleon Bonaparte once said, "When a government is dependent on bankers for money, they, not the leaders of the government, control the situation. Since the hand that gives is above the hand that takes, money has no motherland. Financiers are without patriotism and without decency. Their sole object is gain." Thomas Jefferson said, "If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks will deprive people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. The issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the people." In another quote, he said, "I believe that the banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies." James Madison said, "History records that the money changers have used every form of abuse, intrigue, deceit, and violent means possible to maintain their control over governments by controlling money and its issuance." Andrew Jackson says, "If Congress has the right under the Constitution to issue paper money, it was given them to use themselves, not to be delegated to individuals or corporations." Abraham Lincoln said, "The government should create, issue, and circulate all the currency and credits needed to satisfy the spending power of the government and the buying power of consumers. By the adoption of these principles, the taxpayer will be saved immense sums of interest. Money will cease to be master and become the servant of humanity." After finding out about the death of Abraham Lincoln, the German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck said, "The death of Lincoln was disaster for Christendom. There was no man in the United States great enough to wear his boots, and the bankers went anew to grab the riches. I fear that foreign bankers, with their craftiness and tortuous tricks, will entirely control the exuberant riches of America and use it to systematically corrupt civilization. Theodore Roosevelt said, "Issue of currency should be lodged with the government and be protected from domination by Wall Street. We are opposed to provisions which would place our currency and credit system in private hands." Franklin D. Roosevelt said, "The real truth of the matter is, as you and I know, that financial element in the large centers has owned the government ever since the days of Andrew Jackson." Woodrow Wilson, the president who signed the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, later said, "I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great and industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all of our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men." This brings us back to the Titanic. In this part, I will share other conspiracies, but please note that there is no proof of these people opposing the Federal Reserve. But even if they didn't, they were still major competitors that needed to disappear for complete control. It is said that John Jacob Astor, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isidor Straus were on the Titanic to return home so they can oppose the Federal Reserve Act. These three, along with J.P. Morgan, were the richest, most powerful men in the world. The four men had the net worth of almost $300 million, or over $7.5 billion today. So let's say that these three that died were not coming home to oppose the Federal Reserve Act. Let's say that they were for it. Then the control would be in too many hands. So whether they were for or against the central banking system, it doesn't even matter. They were, at the minimum, major competition. The problem is that these men were very well protected and very difficult to get to, so a plan had to be devised. Let's go back to the Titanic's foolproof rescue operation. Remember when Captain Lord from the SS California kept asking for the color of the rockets? Well, what if white signals meant for them to not rescue and another color meant for them to rescue? Now, the SS Californian was quite a bit smaller than the Titanic. Actually, it could only hold about 57 passengers. Taking into account the cargo hold and also taking into account the other ships were on their way, they could have only saved another 300 to 400 more people. The problem is that if this many were to be saved, first-class passengers would be at the top of the list, and these three men would have potentially survived. J.P. Morgan owned the International Mercantile Marine Company, which owned White Star Lines and Leland Lines. White Star Lines owned the RMS Titanic, and Leland Lines owned the SS Californian. J.P. Morgan was in charge of both ships. J.P. Morgan and most of his acquaintances and business partners were scheduled to be on the maiden voyage of the Titanic, but they all canceled at the very last minute. We may never know if Isidor Straus, Benjamin Guggenheim, and John Jacob Astor were coming back to the United States to stop the Federal Reserve. But we do know one thing. It was very beneficial to J.P. Morgan. Almost every conspiracy directly involves the centralized banking industry, and this will lead directly to World War I. I leave you with a quote from one of the elite families. "Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws." Mayer Amschel Rothschild, founder of the House of Rothschild. Thanks again for watching, and please subscribe so you can see what if the Federal Reserve started World War I.